I'm going to talk this morning about accuracy and details of what's necessary to obtain accuracy when building a rifle. I've touched on some of these aspects in the past, but I'm going to cover a fairly broad section from one end to the other of things here. First things we have to understand, we've got to have a good understanding of how perhaps a lathe runs and the purpose of a lathe and how it was designed. When you do work on a lathe, virtually everything is done off the center line of the lathe, off of centers, or perhaps in a true chuck, or perhaps in true collets, because we can have all these aspects for our various machining operations. So with that in mind, I'm going to go from that right to, for instance, rifle actions. Greatest majority of the rifle actions made just actions themselves, or rifles made today because of the precision CNC equipment that we have today. The repeatability from one part to the next part to the next part to machine things true and accurately. Now, for many, many years, professional, very experienced gunsmiths such as myself, we've trued rifle actions, trued the receiver, some instances threads. For instance, on the Remington 700s, there's virtually no thread on a Remington 700 that's true, and neither is the receiver face. Quite possibly, the recoil lug abutment in the action is not true. Perhaps the lugs on the bolt are not true. So all these things have to be trued up in a lathe. I true these things up, I true the action up in the chuck, in a true chuck, in my lathe. I don't have to indicate anything in here. A true chuck means exactly that, true. It runs true. Definitely within 1/10,000th of an inch, and you don't really machine anything much closer than that, irregardless of what the setup might happen to be. So, putting a Remington 700 receiver in a true chuck and lining everything up as far as the threading tool and so forth, I've been through those aspects before, and facing the receiver face, and facing the recoil lugs, facing the bolt face, and so forth. Now, we'll go from there to our military actions. Invariably, the receiver ring face needs to be faced lightly to get that true. The only way that that can be done is that make mandrels that'll fit through the receiver and are threaded. For instance, the bolt bore in the receiver, let's say that it's 700 diameter. You turn your mandrel to go clear through that action to around 695, about 5 thousandths under, and that needs to expand past the end of the action when the mandrel is threaded into the action past about an inch, and maybe extend about 2 inches out the front. You simply turn down a piece of steel. Let's say that we want to make a mandrel for a 98 Mauser. A 98 Mauser has 1 inch and 100 by 12 thread per inch thread. Well, we need a piece of, for instance, cold roll stock, or perhaps maybe lead alloy stock that's at least 1 inch, an inch and 1/8. That's 1 and 125. So you can turn that down to 1 inch and 100. Then you turn each end of that mandrel to 5 thousandths under the size of the bolt bore in the receiver. Thread the about a 3/4 inch long section on that mandrel, 1 inch 100 by 12 threads, till that will just thread in a 98 action. And you thread that mandrel in and you turn it up tight against the inner headspace ring in the 98 Mauser. The 98 Mauser has an inner ring that you shoulder the barrel up against. And while you're doing these things, you can true the receiver face. Well, that receiver is on that mandrel through the receiver face. That trues the receiver face true to the thread. This is what it's about. It has to be concentric and true to the thread. The same applies to Springfields, Enfields, and other actions. You make mandrels. I have numerous mandrels that I've made, 50 years ago and longer. Some that I've made lately, because there's different threads and one thing another, different situations. You need to have all these tools. You need to make these tools. There's some of these things that you can buy, some of them you can't. I prefer to make what I want to suit my situation. That's where everything starts. Everything's got to be true. And as far as the rest of the lineup and whatnot for a barrel, I've went through that in other videos and so forth. But everything's got to be machine true. If it's not true, you're not going to get the accuracy. And anyway, that's where everything starts. Now, there's a misconception among people that every rifle that you build, you have to true every action. No, that's not true. I've already reiterated that these actions coming off of this precision machinery, they're already true. They don't need to be trued. For instance, I've built rifles on many, many different actions over the years. Just about everything there is to build a rifle around. And I've found that over the years, even going back many years ago into the Seiko aspect, our early Seikos, our small Seikos, L461s, L579s, and L61 actions. Those actions were made precisionally. You got to understand, for one thing, they come from a part of the world where they know precision. It came from Finland. It came from that part of the world where they know precision, so they were made right in the first place. You didn't have to true up a Seiko action. It was already true when you got it. They're wonderful actions. It's too bad that they quit making just actions for sale to the gun maker. That was quite a hit to the gun maker when we lost that aspect, because there were wonderful actions to build everything from 222 size cartridges, 243 size cartridges, up to most all of our magnums, except for our larger than H&H case head magnums based off the 378 case and others. But anyway, there's a lot of actions out there. There's a lot of things being made. I take apart a lot of different rifles a lot of times to build something on, to rebarrel, and I quick find out by checking with a depth micrometer, and if I've got a mandrel that fits the thread, or I'll make a mandrel, I'll make sure, and I learn real quick that whether it's true or not by measuring things, by running things on a lathe, by checking these things. So you've got to have as much work as I do, and as broad as my work base is, building rifles on dozens and dozens of different type of rifle actions. I have many mandrels to fit all these situations, to take care of these situations. But I'm reiterating the newest things coming out here. We don't have to true these things up. All the Seiko products, everything coming from Seiko. It's all from the very beginning of many, many years ago when they made the first early Seiko actions to all the actions that they made since. Invariably, these things are made true. They come true. They understood the machinery that they used. The people that did these things, they knew machining, and they did it right. They didn't do it haphazardly and sloppy. So those are the things that you need to pay attention to. Now, the other aspect is it's pretty important that we have good tools, good chambering tools to be able to chamber barrels and so forth. And you can buy chamber reamers with either a solid pilot or a removable pilot. The solid pilot is okay if it is a proper size, but invariably they make those reamers with the pilot about 1,000ths under the bore size. Well, that's not particularly a good thing. You're much better off having a removable pilot reamer and various different size pilots. And from one barrel manufacturer to another, for instance, 30 caliber designates a 300.300 bore size. Well, that means that you need a pilot. You need a pilot that will just slip in that bore size, and probably 299.5 right in there somewhere. But you got to understand that, could have different bore sizes. Bore sizes could vary perhaps 1,000 or so, maybe, invariably, if it's going to vary, it's going to be bigger rather than smaller. So that's not a good thing. But I have run into the last year or two, people manufacturing barrels that they've got actually a bore that's smaller. Now this is a real pain in the neck, because if we've got a bore that's 1,000 smaller than what the normal size is, we don't have a pilot. There's not a pilot made to fit something that's that small. So going to have to either make a pilot or take a pilot and put in the lathe between centers, a pilot that you have, and dress it down. Sand that pilot down so it will fit the bore. These things are important so that we have things lined up. I went through in previous video how to properly line up and chamber barrels, but I didn't touch on one particular aspect of that. I'm going to touch on that now. Is anybody chambering rifle barrel at some point in time, irregardless of good alignment of the pilot, a top quality reamer from a top quality reamer manufacturer, you're going to run into situations where perhaps your reamer may want to chatter. Well, this can be kind of a problematic sort of thing. It can be kind of a nightmare if you don't know what to do about it. And I know what to do about it, and I've had to do it probably over 100 times, take care of this situation. There's only one way that you can take care of it. I, as a rule, chamber using a lathe dog. Not always. I use a floating reamer holder from time to time, but the minute that I start having a problem by either method, the first thing that I do, I make sure that the reamer is oiled well. I dip the reamer in the oil bucket, and I tear off a piece of cotton cloth about 3/8 of an inch wide or so. A piece maybe about 4 or 5 inches long. And I wrap that right at the shoulder. You start right on the neck, and you wrap right onto the shoulder and right up onto the shoulder body of the reamer. You wrap that cloth on there counterclockwise. I said counterclockwise. Dip that, you hold that cloth on there carefully so it won't spin back off. and you take your reamer, dip that in the oil, turn your lathe on, start that reamer in the chamber, however depth that you are, whatever. And as soon as you have a reamer start chattering, you need to correct it early. You need to correct it early on. Now reamers will stabilize to some extent once they've run up on the body section of the reamer, perhaps about 1/4 of an inch. But anyway, you carefully feel that, and you slowly feed that reamer with that cloth wrapped onto it. Now, this stabilizes the reamer in the hole, and it takes all the tolerances out. And that reamer forced in there, it'll cut through the cloth, and it'll properly clean up and clean the chatter out. You might have to make a couple of passes, 2 or 3 passes like I'm describing, to be able to take this chatter out. It's impossible to get the chatter out, if you run clear to depth or near to depth. But if you're less than halfway in, you've got ample opportunity to be able to correct a chattering reamer situation. And once that's cleaned up and it's quit chattering, now you can go back and just forget the rag and ease that reamer in there and see that it continues to cut cleanly and smoothly without any chatter. This is a secret. This is a gunsmithing, chambering secret that us people that have chambered literally thousands of barrels, we've had to figure these things out all on our own. So this is important. So everything done precisionally, everything done true, everything put together on a true action, the threads true to the bore of the barrel, the chamber true, everything true is where you get accuracy. And I've detailed other things. I've detailed how to properly crown a barrel, and you need very, very good sharp cutting tools to crown the barrel so that there's not any strain on the tool at all where it wants to roll the burr up and so forth. Everything cuts clean, and all those things done properly, and then going from there to putting a rifle together, bedding it and everything. I've detailed this in other videos. But anyway, those are the things that are important. And the rest of the accuracy aspect is up to you as a reloader, or perhaps maybe you might possibly be an experienced hand loader. There's very few that are very experienced at hand loading. But anyway, just weighing a charge and using quality brass and quality components and everything is not the end result. You have to work up a load, and this is what people don't seem to understand. You have to work up and tailor a load. It's just like setting the points on your spark plugs in your vehicle to the proper gap. You see, that is also a situation where you have to adjust things to a point where it works properly. It's just like adjusting the valves on an engine or anything else. All these things have to be done properly. And, working up a load, depending on the size of the case, perhaps, graduating a half a grain at a time, or some very small cases, only graduating maybe 2/10 of a grain at a time to work these things up. All these things, all work out when you hit a balance. You've hit a ballistics balance to get the accuracy. You can't get accuracy with high velocity spreads. It's not possible to get accuracy with high velocity spreads, especially when you extend the range past 100 yards. All these things have to be adhered to. And I'll have folks say, well, I've tried this and I've tried that and tried, something else. Well, one of the aspects is perhaps maybe you haven't loaded that charge yet. Maybe you only have needed to go up another half of a grain, or perhaps a grain of powder more in a case to take it from an 1.25 inch gun down to a 1/2 inch gun. So don't fault the barrel, don't fault the rifle. It's only going to shoot as well as you are capable of understanding the loading process and all the things that are necessary to obtain the precision accuracy that you're looking for. Now, there are barrels that shoot better than other people's barrels, and barrels vary from various manufacturers in size and one thing or another. I don't particularly, engage in buying those barrels. The greatest share of barrels that I buy from Hart, because these barrels really shoot well, and Jim Hart really knows what he's doing. All the Harts, the Harts have taught many people in the barrel business how to make barrels properly. So if you want to go to where the real source is, that's where it is. That's where the button rifle end of things started many, many years ago, at Hart. And we've got other methods of making barrels and so forth, but they know how to make barrels, and the barrels are always marked the size, the groove size of the barrel. They're written right on the side of the barrel what the barrel is. They're proud of them, and they make them properly. The next barrel that I feel is as equally as an accurate a barrel, from my experience, is a Bartlein barrel. A Bartlein barrel will shoot very, very well, and I've never encountered anything that was dimensionally off with their barrels either. But everybody makes a barrel now in this day and age that they claim to be match quality barrels. Well, some of them are, and some of them aren't. And some of them are on size, and some of them aren't. And invariably, the same manufacturer, you could buy a half a dozen 30 caliber barrels at a time, and they might be all different groove size. I have a set of precision Sheffield bore gauges to measure anything, any groove diameter in a barrel up to a 1/2 inch. So I can check these things. I don't need to check a Hart barrel. I already know what it is, because when it comes to me, it tells me what the size is. And, they really know their business. And same way with some of these other barrels. So these are the aspects. And some of these things can be quite frustrating at times. But if you listen to what I have to say and the details, it's all there to get the accuracy. And I have had the experience over the greatest share of my lifetime to figure a lot of these things out. Figured out a lot of things years ago. But I learn every day that I do something, I learn something. Irregardless of what I'm doing, I learn something. This is what makes this fascinating. This is what makes this, this profession enjoyable. For one thing, I can talk about it because it's not only my profession, but it's my life. It's what I enjoy. It's what I do. And I know what has to be done. And experience, there's no greater aspect to anything than the great amount of experience that there is, to do these things. So, you see, this is what it's about. Now, we can go beyond the rifle to rifle scopes and whatnot. I question a lot of these things coming out today because there's so many scopes coming from foreign countries, and I'm not saying that there isn't some quality coming from some parts of the world, you see, to do with rifle scopes, but I don't want to invest my money in some other part of the world. The United States is in trouble. the United States is in trouble with a bunch of idiots trying to run the country and destroying the economy of this country. I don't need my livelihood destroyed because things are taken to some other part of the world and one thing another. So I try to buy and try to encourage people to buy. But it seems like there's a new rifle scope out here every day, and you know, this is not particularly a good thing in my estimation. But anyway, this is kind of where everything all fits into the accuracy game. I've covered a broad area here, and if you haven't paid close attention the first time you've listened to my video, I think you ought to run it. I think you ought to run it a second time or maybe a third time to absorb it. Don't just, and then all of a sudden, have a question. Listen, run it a second time, maybe a third time, to see exactly, get the meat out of it, what I'm talking about. I try to cover as much of this as I possibly can. So, this is all that I can do.